Hi, today we're going to talk about the Monroe Doctrine, nationalism, and sectionalism. After the War of 1812, which we've just finished, remember that the United States had secured its borders and they got the land of Louisiana purchased back, and there was still land out west owned by the British. And so rather than having another war, they secured a bunch of treaties. You may remember the map on the wall with all the different colors. And so those were all formalized into kind of what we have today with Canada. Down on our southern border, Florida, which had been given to the Spanish after the Revolutionary War, there were some problems going on over here in the Georgia area along the border and down here in Florida. The Seminole Indians, who largely today, just like the Florida State Seminoles, the Indians there. They were coming across the border between Georgia and Florida and raiding the settlers in those areas. And Andrew Jackson, who was the hero of the Battle of New Orleans, he was given the Southern command. And when he went down there, every time they would hear of a Indian raid, the Seminoles would cross back a border into Florida, which is essentially Spain. Now, after a series of times, we've seen, like Andrew Jackson, he's a pretty aggressive guy. So when given that he couldn't do anything about it, he decided to cross over and follow the Seminole Indians into Florida. And that's what he's going to do. So the Seminole Indians are the main group of Indians. Once the army is fighting back and forth, as I said, they're going to cross over and invading there. Now, once the Indians are scattered, some Indians are captured and some are just dispersed and they run away. There's still Seminole Indians in Florida today, so they spread out into the forests and thickets and swamps of Florida. After that, he went ahead and attacked Spanish forts that were down there. There's the only thing down there really was Spanish forts, not too many Spanish settlements, and uh, went ahead and pushed ahead. Once he was done, now the war happened, and before Washington, D.C., President Monroe even knew what was going on, like by the time he found out what was going on, the war was already over. And so even on the Spanish side, so there was a treaty, and uh, as this slide here shows, they exchanged land, Florida, for land that would be part of Texas. And as you can see right here, this is Osceola, the Seminole chief, not really happy with the agreement. And as I said, that's going to be an ongoing problem down there in Florida. But the United States gained Florida. Now, as this has been going, it's kind of effectively moved Britain beyond its border into the north. It's now moved Florida off of the continent. Now the Spanish off the continent out of Florida. Now they're mainly in Mexico. I guess that's still the continent. And then in the islands, South America and the islands in the Caribbean, there's some things going on. Now, what he's also at this time, at around our time of our revolution, Haiti has a revolution, and other Caribbean nations start gaining independence. President Monroe, who was the last of the Revolutionary War presidents, looked at these revolutions and he was afraid that when the colonies would be uh, overthrown by the revolutions, that the colonial owners would come back and try to get them. And so he decided he needed to do something about that. So in 1823, he's going to issue what's called the Monroe Doctrine. And the idea is that it's saying the United States, along with these new independent countries, do not want outlying European countries to come and intercede in our business. As this slide shows, kind of putting a proverbial wall around us in the United North and South America. And it was initially Britain wanted to be involved in this agreement, but the Americans thought that would be an invitation to the British that they could still come over and mess around. So it was an American-only thing. There are a few examples, and some we're going to work on in the next class tomorrow on how it's been used. But here's a few times in the late 1800s, the United States bought or acquired land and built the Panama Canal, which is still in use today. You can see in this picture, it allows, before we've talked about the Northwest Passage, and there is no Northwest Passage, so this allows shipping to go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean through the Panama Canal. In 1962, the Soviet Union had started building missile bases here in Cuba, which is only 90 miles away from southern Florida. These are actual U-2 spy photos from that. There was a very stressful situation there, which led to a blockade of Cuba and really a really tense situation for the people back then. Eventually, the Soviet Union backed down and removed all the missile sites. It was eventually learned later there was an agreement that the United States removed our nuclear missiles from Turkey in exchange for this. And I think that's the end.